The old clock above the counter ticked lazily as the late evening sun painted golden streaks across the small roadside diner. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air. Truckers chatted quietly in one corner, an elderly couple shared pie in another, and the jukebox hummed a soft country tune in the background. Then, the peace shattered. The heavy door swung open with a loud creak, followed by the thud of boots that seemed too loud for the tiny space. A man entered, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a black leather jacket with chains clinking at his sides. His beard was rough, his arms covered in tattoos, and a long scar ran down the side of his cheek. The atmosphere instantly changed. Conversations died mid-sentence, spoons froze mid-air. The biker scanned the room with sharp, restless eyes. It wasn't the first time he had walked into a place like this, and everyone seemed to recognize his type, trouble. His presence was heavy, as if the room itself held its breath. Behind the counter, Emma, a young waitress with kind eyes and hair pulled into a messy bun, straightened her apron. She had served every kind of customer before, from tired travelers to drunk late-night wanderers. But something about this man's energy made her heart skip. Still, she forced a polite smile. "Good evening, sir," she said softly, carrying her notepad in hand. "Would you like a booth or a counter seat?" The biker ignored her words at first, stomping toward a booth in the corner. He dropped heavily into the seat, the leather creaking under his weight. Then, without looking up, he muttered in a deep, gravelly voice, "Coffee. Strong. And make it quick." Emma nodded, hiding the nervous flutter in her chest. As she turned toward the coffee pot, she could feel the eyes of the other customers following her every step. They were all waiting to see how this encounter would unfold. When she returned with the steaming cup, placing it gently in front of him, he didn't say thank you. Instead, he grabbed it roughly, sloshing a bit onto the table. Emma quietly wiped it up, her hands steady, her face calm. She had learned not to take rudeness personally. But something told her this man wasn't just another rude customer. There was a storm behind those eyes, and before the night was over, it was going to break. The biker sat slouched in the booth, his heavy boots tapping against the floor in a restless rhythm. He gulped down the steaming coffee in one go, slammed the cup onto the table, and scowled. "Too weak," he muttered gruffly. "Don't you people know how to make real coffee?" Emma took a steady breath. She was used to short-tempered customers, but something about this man's tone carried more than just impatience. It was anger, frustration, maybe pain. Still, she kept her voice calm. "I'll brew you a stronger one, sir," she said kindly. "It'll take just a couple of minutes." But her politeness seemed to irritate him even more. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Minutes? I don't have minutes. I've been on the road all day. I need it now." His voice boomed across the diner, making the elderly couple flinch. The diner fell into silence again. Forks hovered midair, truckers exchanged glances, and even the jukebox seemed to grow quieter. Emma felt her throat tighten, but she refused to show fear. She straightened her shoulders. "Sir, I understand you're tired. But please lower your voice. You're disturbing the other customers." That was it. The biker's patience snapped like a dry twig. He pushed the empty cup aside so hard that it rattled against the wall. Then, before Emma could react, he stood up and grabbed her arm, pulling her closer to him. Gasps echoed around the room. Emma tried to pull back, but his grip was like iron. Her heart pounded, but her eyes stayed steady, refusing to let him see her fear. "You think you can tell me what to do?" he growled, his face inches from hers. "You don't know who you're talking to, girl." The tension in the diner was unbearable. One of the truckers half rose from his seat, ready to step in, but hesitated. The biker looked dangerous, like the kind of man who could crush anyone who got in his way. Emma's mind raced. She had handled drunks, rude businessmen, and impatient travelers before, but never someone this unpredictable. Still, She tried to reason with him, her voice soft but firm. Please let go. This isn't the way. But instead of releasing her, the biker sneered. His hand clutched her jacket, and with one violent jerk, RRRIP, the fabric tore open at the shoulder. The sound was sharp and shocking. The diner gasped again, but this time it wasn't just because of his aggression. Because what the rip revealed was something no one, not even Emma, expected to be exposed that night. The sound of the tearing jacket echoed louder than it should have, a cruel ripping noise that seemed to slice through the tension-filled silence of the diner. Emma stumbled back, clutching at her shoulder where the fabric had been pulled apart. Her breath caught in her throat, but not because of the ruined jacket. Because something hidden beneath the worn, faded cloth was now exposed to every pair of eyes in the room. Underneath her waitress uniform, sewn carefully onto an undershirt, was a patch. Not just any patch, it was a military insignia. Bold, recognizable, a mark of honor, the red cross of a combat medic, surrounded by faded stitching and worn threads. For a moment, no one moved. The entire diner seemed frozen in time. Forks clinked softly as they slipped from trembling hands. The truckers stared. The elderly couple leaned forward, squinting. Even the jukebox's song seemed to fade into the background. Emma's face turned pale. She quickly tried to pull her jacket closed, but the damage was done. The secret she had guarded so carefully, the part of her life she never spoke about, was now laid bare in the most humiliating way possible. The biker's grip loosened. His eyes, once filled with anger, now widened in disbelief. His mouth opened, but no words came out at first. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. You, he finally whispered, his voice trembling. You served. Emma didn't answer. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her hands gripping the torn fabric as though she could hide the truth if she just held it tightly enough. She hated attention. She hated pity. That part of her past was supposed to stay buried beneath diner aprons and coffee pots, far from curious eyes. The customers whispered among themselves now. A soldier. She was in the military. No wonder she's so strong. Emma's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. She wanted to explain, but she also didn't. Memories she had tried so hard to lock away were now knocking at the door of her heart. Memories of battlefield smoke, of blood, of lives saved and lives lost. And standing before her, the biker wasn't sneering anymore. His jaw quivered, and his fists unclenched slowly, as if every ounce of rage was draining out of him. His rough exterior seemed to crumble in an instant, revealing something raw beneath it, something broken. What had started as a moment of cruelty had suddenly transformed into a moment of truth, one that no one inside that diner would ever forget. The diner was still, so still that the hum of the overhead lights suddenly sounded louder than ever. Emma stood frozen, clutching the ripped edges of her jacket, her cheeks flushed with both embarrassment and anger. She hated being exposed, hated that strangers now knew something about her she had spent years hiding. The biker's grip had already loosened, but he hadn't stepped back. He just stared, his rough face pale, his hands shaking slightly, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. You, he said again, softer this time, like a man who didn't believe what he was seeing. His voice cracked. You were there. You served. Emma's lips parted, but no words came out. She wanted to tell him to sit back down, to stop drawing attention, to let her go back to being just a simple waitress in a forgotten roadside diner. But her throat tightened. Memories she had buried, sirens, smoke, soldiers crying out in pain, came rushing back, making her eyes sting. She lowered her gaze, trying to hold it all in. The biker staggered back a step, running a rough hand across his scarred face. His shoulders, once tense and threatening, now drooped as if weighed down by something far heavier than anger. His eyes glistened. My God, he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. All this time, and here you are. The entire diner leaned in. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if every soul inside that little room had become a witness to a moment bigger than themselves. The truckers sat silently, their usual rough talk gone. The old couple clasped hands across the table, their pie untouched. Even the waitress behind the counter stood with her mouth slightly open, a coffee pot forgotten in her hand. Emma finally raised her head, her voice low but steady. I don't talk about it. Not here. Not anywhere. The biker swallowed hard. His tough facade cracked completely now. His lips trembled as he whispered words that sent shivers down everyone's spine. A medic like you, once saved my life. The silence deepened. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Emma blinked, stunned, unsure if she had heard him right. And in that instant, the whole diner understood. This wasn't just a random act of violence anymore. This was something deeper. Something that connected two broken lives in a way no one expected. The rough biker who had stormed in with fire in his eyes was no longer the same man standing there now. He looked smaller somehow, vulnerable, as if the memory of a battlefield had just ripped his own heart wide open. The biker's voice trembled as he repeated, almost as if he was speaking to himself, a medic like you once saved my life. The words hung heavy in the stillness of the diner. Emma's eyes flickered with confusion. She searched his face. This hardened man with tattoos, scars, and anger etched into his skin, and for the first time, she saw something different. Not rage, not arrogance, but grief. He lowered himself back into the booth, his large frame suddenly looking tired, smaller, as if years of weight pressed down on him all at once. He rubbed his hands together nervously, the rough calluses scraping against each other, then looked up at Emma with eyes glistening with unshed tears. My brother. His voice cracked, and he cleared his throat, trying to steady it. My brother didn't make it home. He was only 19. But me, I did. And the only reason I did was because a combat medic dragged me out of hell when everyone else thought I was gone. Emma's heart clenched. She had seen countless young men on the battlefield, had stitched wounds with trembling hands, had whispered desperate words of comfort as bullets whistled overhead. She didn't remember faces anymore. Too many, far too many. But she remembered the weight of saving lives, the crushing pain of the ones she couldn't. The biker's hand shook as he reached for the torn edge of her jacket, his voice breaking. That patch, that insignia, it's burned into my memory. I'll never forget it. When I saw it, his breath hitched. It felt like I was staring at the ghost who saved me. Gasps rippled quietly through the diner. Some customers had tears forming in their eyes now. Emma swallowed hard, fighting back her own emotions. I don't know if it was me, she whispered. There were many of us out there. But the biker shook his head firmly. Doesn't matter. You're one of them. One of the ones who risked everything while the rest of us just tried to survive. He paused, his voice lowering to a broken confession. And here I am, treating you like dirt. Like you're nothing. When in truth, I owe my life to people like you. His hands covered his face now, his shoulders shaking, not from anger anymore, but from shame. The man who had walked in as a storm of fury now sat trembling, his armor of toughness shattered for the entire diner to see. Finally, he dropped to his knees right there in front of Emma. The sound of his heavy body hitting the diner floor startled everyone. He looked up at her, eyes red, voice raw. I'm sorry, he whispered. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging for it anyway. For the jacket. For how I treated you. For forgetting what real strength looks like. Emma's chest tightened. She had seen soldiers beg for mercy in the chaos of war, but seeing this hardened biker kneeling before her, trembling like a broken child, was something different, something that made every soul in the diner realize they were witnessing a transformation. The biker didn't ask for sympathy. He didn't ask for anything but the chance to atone. And Emma, she stood silently for a moment, torn between anger and compassion. Then, slowly, her hardened expression softened. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the diner. The best way to honor those who saved you, she said gently, is not by kneeling in regret. It's by living better than the man who walked in here tonight. The biker's lips quivered, but he nodded. Deeply. Gratefully. He understood. The diner, which had been silent for so long, finally erupted in soft applause. Not because of the waitress's hidden past, not because of the biker's confession, but because they had all witnessed something rare, the moment a man truly changed. The diner remained quiet even after the applause faded, as if no one wanted to break the fragile moment of truth that had just unfolded. The biker was still on his knees, his broad shoulders trembling under the weight of emotions he had carried for years. His tough exterior, the tattoos, the scars, the heavy chains, all looked meaningless now. What everyone saw instead was a man stripped bare of pride, of anger, of his false armor. Emma looked down at him, torn jacket clutched against her chest. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her silence wasn't cold, it was thoughtful. The kind of silence that makes every person lean in, waiting, holding their breath. Finally, she extended her hand. Not in pity, not in weakness, but in strength. Stand up, she said softly. This isn't where you belong. Not on the floor. The biker hesitated. His lips parted, eyes searching hers, unsure if he deserved the gesture. But Emma's gaze didn't waver. Firm, compassionate, relentless in its quiet power. Slowly, almost shakily, he took her hand, and she helped him rise. When he stood, towering above her, it was no longer intimidation, it was respect. He pulled the chain from around his neck, a heavy silver chain he always wore as a symbol of toughness, and placed it gently on the table. I don't need this anymore, he said, his voice rough but steady. I want to start over. Be better. Because of you. A murmur of approval spread through the diner. The truckers nodded quietly. The old couple wiped tears from their eyes. Even the waitress, behind the counter, smiled with relief. The entire room seemed to have softened, as if the air itself was lighter. Emma studied him for a moment. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. If you want to thank me, then live in a way your brother would be proud of. That's the only redemption that matters. The biker's eyes filled again, but this time not with grief, with resolve. He nodded slowly, firmly, like a man making a vow. I will. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he reached into his worn leather wallet, pulled out a thick roll of bills, and laid it on the counter. For her jacket, for her meals, and for anyone in here tonight, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the diner. On me. Gasps of surprise turned into soft claps, then into a wave of applause. The once terrifying biker had become a man of humility in front of strangers who would never forget this night. Emma didn't smile widely or bask in the attention. She simply placed a hand on his arm and said quietly, so only he could hear, everyone has scars. Some are on the outside. Some are hidden. What makes us different is what we choose to do with them. The biker lowered his head, nodding like a student before a teacher. For the first time in years, he felt peace. As he walked out of the diner, slower, calmer, lighter, the bell above the door chimed gently. And this time, instead of silence and fear, the room was filled with something else. Hope. Because everyone knew they had just witnessed not only the breaking of a man, but the rebirth of one.